Good evening, everyone. I am Sarah Berman, and I am hosting tonight's author panel. Today we are talking about world building and how we do that. So let's get some introductions done with our awesome authors. I think we've gone back and forth between you two being first for several author panels, so we'll flip a coin and go with Timothy.
All right, I'm Timothy Bateson. I'm an urban fantasy and sci-fi writer. I'm also the executive director for this year's OWSCycon. It's been an absolute pleasure putting everything together for everyone, and I hope you enjoy these panels as much as I enjoy being on them.
All right, and Erin?
Hi, I'm Erin Casey. I'm an urban fantasy writer and fantasy, and apparently I can't speak tonight. I am the author of The Purple Door District, an urban fantasy book that just came out last December, and its sequel will be coming out December 2019, and it is called Wolf Pit. So I'm really excited for that book.
Yeah. All right, and again, I'm Sarah Berman. I am the genre manager for Urban Fantasy, and of course the host tonight, author of the Rune Spells series. Do not forget to check out our author booths in the Urban Fantasy page on OWSCycon2019.com. Did I get that right?
OWSCycon.ourrightside.com.
Ah, there we go. See, too many dots.
I haven't had to say that too many times.
I'm sure.
So we will be putting links in the descriptions. I will make sure that those get taken care of when I post these. So let's get right into that topic and discuss world building. Now, the interesting thing with urban fantasy is there is a kind of implication that at least a significant portion of the world is quote unquote real life. So where do you guys start from, and what do you use to base your settings on?
I actually have my stories for the Shadows over Seattle series are very obviously, for the most part, based in Seattle. So I have a very well-known city, and it's very difficult when you've got that to look at changing things. But by the same token, I've got access to things like Google Maps. I've got access to people's travel photos. I've got access to so many resources. Like if I want to find out how high the viewing platform is at the Columbia Center, I can just go onto their website and go, oh, it's on this floor.
That's definitely an advantage.
So actually having so much that people are familiar with is a big help for me. But I do make changes where I feel they're necessary to fill the story.
Mm-hmm.
My series right now is set in Chicago, so again, another big city, and it's helpful because of all the pictures, and though I will say, oh my God, there are a lot of bars and dance clubs in Chicago, because I was trying to find one for my parahumans, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. So I just went through pictures, and I'm like, does this look like a place a parahuman would hang out? Okay, let's go with this. Some of it's come from when I've gone there to visit. I grew up near Chicago, so that helped a little bit. And some of it comes from my dad working there, because he'll let me know about some of the more expensive places versus the poor locations in Chicago. So that kind of helped me map out where certain characters were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely not as many running grounds for werewolves as I had hoped there would be.
That is a truth.
So I had to get a little creative with that.
Yeah, I had to get a little creative. You're talking about clubs and stuff. I actually ended up stealing one from one of my wife's stories, The Devil's Own, and we picked a location in Seattle for it. That's a place. We picked an address on the map. The address on the map is a flat parking lot. But it does have an alleyway running alongside it, so we kind of got that part right. But my wife actually used to live in Seattle, so she knows the area where a lot of the materials are set pretty well. And
Nice.
when I got my feet on the ground, Google Maps lied. There's a chase scene that happens in one of my stories where, according to Google Maps, it looks like it goes downhill in the direction of the chase. It doesn't. It actually goes uphill.
Oh, geez.
And then goes downhill.
Whoops.
But it's Seattle, and hills are a fact of life.
Yeah. I actually took a bar in Chicago. I'm blanking on the name of it at the moment, but there was something very distinct about it. And I was like, I'm going to switch that to work with my world. So there's kind of like the parahuman equivalent of it for my vampires, because it was a very classy very classy club that they actually have a dress code at this place, and you only notice it by basically like a single light that hangs outside the door, which, since mine's the purple door district, I made the bulb purple to signify parahuman safe. But that was funny, reading that, looking at the pictures and trying to figure out, well, how am I going to describe this, and what am I going to make different inside that it's going to be more vampire friendly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually went with Indianapolis for my first book, and my husband grew up in Indianapolis, so I kind of had an in there.
Mm-hmm.
But Google Maps again, yeah, totally, because I had a setting where I needed a place where a bunch of homeless, street kids would congregate. And there's this place called the Rainbow Bridge. It's actually a bridge painted in rainbow colors.
Cool.
So, yeah. And I found pictures on it, so I was able to describe the bridge and the area around it. And the other thing that I needed that turned out to be really awesome, I needed a place for them to go underground and hide out for a while and essentially be off-grid in the middle of Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to my husband, and I was like, well, does Indianapolis have like some places have like the storm drains that are like really big and people hang out in them, or subway tunnels or things like that? And he's like, well, there are the ruins. And I'm like, what?
Ruins?
There are flippin' tunnels under Indianapolis.
So basically, like so many stories of other cities, the city is built on the ruins of the city.
Well, I think they were created, and then there are like larger tunnels that are like semi-connected to these that essentially they needed a way to get giant trucks full of quarry stones from the quarries to the shipping areas without actually going through the city. So they built roads underground. And I'm like, you're kidding. And he's like, no, they're called this, and they have tours and everything. And I get online. There's pictures.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, there's like these, so I essentially had them go into this like one area that was like less stable, so it was closed off from the tourism and everything. But I was like,
wow,
oh my god, this
that's
is like some
awesome.
European city crap here.
That's amazing.
Just as long as you don't come up against the wall of skulls and things that you found in the Paris catacombs.
Oh yeah, I mean, why not, right? But so I actually I quizzed him a lot about it and found out the general area. And coincidentally, there's one of the main places where they have the tours for this underground, ruins tunnel system is only a handful of blocks away from a huge Masonic temple, like, one of the big ones that takes up an entire city block.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, guess where the entrance to the tunnel system is going to be? They have their own little back entrance. And so, yeah, so now there's characters who are secretly Masons and But yeah, it's like, wow.
That's amazing. You know,
Yeah.
I love the fact that all three of us, the cities that we focus on, we somehow have a connection with them, whether we live there or SOs live there. I know in probably the third book, we're going to move somewhat towards Wisconsin, where the other part of my family is, so I'm familiar with that. There's going to be so much cheese. All the
Oh dear. Yeah, I did have a harder time writing one of my stories, which I've got set in the desert.
Oh, jeez.
It's an Iraq War story.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually managed to do a lot of research again online, so I got to see pictures of what the area looked like. I got a lot of aerial views, unfortunately, compared to actual on the ground pictures. But then I was able to touch base with people who've been there, so
Yeah.
it was helpful.
There are giant spiders there. Did you know that? Like gigantic spiders.
That's one of the reasons I haven't gone and done the research in person.
Yeah, and the travel expense. I mean, really.
And you know,
Yeah.
like the war and things like that.
Silly things. But yeah, I think it's fabulous that, there's so much that we can do with online resources. I mean, there's a lot of flack given to people for, like taking pictures of everything and documenting everything and this, that, and the other thing. But let me tell you something, you tag those pictures, right, and you're giving an author the ability to describe things as they see it, not as somebody else has told them.
Right.
And that can make all of the difference.
Yeah. I actually was very lucky before I went down to Seattle. I knew a particular landmark I wanted to visit because of pictures I'd seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I find out it's a lot bigger than I thought. And that's the Fremont Troll.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's a concrete troll sitting under a bridge with a VW bug pinned down under one hand.
A real.
Oh my god.
A real VW bug.
Yeah, I've
That's
seen the pictures of
amazing.
That's
that.
how big this thing is. I mean, you can sit up on its arm and put your whole hand up its nose.
Troll bogies. Troll
We
bogies.
actually have a picture of me doing exactly that.
Nice.
Oh my gosh, that should be the picture for this panel.
I could send it over.
I'd love that. I want to see it now.
I'll post it in the group afterwards.
There we go. Yeah.
But it does lead to the interesting things when you're talking about characters like trolls and stuff.
Mhm.
Is there are things that don't exist in the real world
Mhm.
that we actually look at in the stories that we're creating. I personally have a lot of supernatural creatures,
Same.
and what's your method for putting them into the modern world?
Well, for the Fae characters, or Veil characters, I guess I should say. So there's the real world, and then there's the Veil, and the Veil is where the Fae folk originally come from. Now they've come through magical aether pockets. So I have ether and aether. Aether is Fae related, ether is earth related. But so they come through these pockets and they've adjusted to earth over the years. There's a long story behind that. I won't get into it. But like my Fae have glamours that they can use to hide what they actually look like. So they can walk around, they can change their skin and their appearance. I actually have a satyr that appears in the very first chapter of Wolf Pit, who's actually the bartender of one of the Chicago bars. And I imagine he's probably friends with one of the Fae, so he can get a charm to hide his legs and his horns, because he definitely uses his horns at one point in the first chapter. I love him. But the Veil folk did not adjust to Earth very well at first. It took many, 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 many years for them to get used to it and basically make sure that their magic and Earth magic could adjust with each other. But yeah, they basically try the best way to fit in. Now, also for the Fae, they have a area called Fae Way, which is essentially their district. So it's magical, where only parahumans or Fae like themselves can actually get into it. And that's where they can basically just walk through in their natural forms, have it be more earthy and magical, and nobody with a human eye knows any better. So that's easier for some of the less adjusted Fae to still survive in our world.
Yeah, I tend to go with the Werewolf the Apocalypse version. If any of you are familiar with White Wolf, essentially nobody knows that most of this stuff happens, and if they happen to see it, the human brain is really, 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 really good at saying, no, it was this. and I also have just enough snark that if something is too obvious, my characters are taking the obvious route and doing things like just doing the rehearsal for this movie, or wow, aren't those special effects great? Just give that little veil a nudge and push them into.
I was going to say, if you're going World of Darkness with it, why not just have a mage cast an illusion? Have a pet wizard in your pocket.
In my world, that wouldn't work because the magic is more sympathetic rather than overt.
Ooh,
so
right.
The joke is unless you're actually setting off an explosion, there are no fireballs.
No fireballs.
Unless you're setting off an explosion, and she does.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
So again, it comes back to that veil thing of how obvious do you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
We actually went a different route with it. We actually have the supernaturals living hand in hand with the city folk.
Nice.
Because they're a little bit of a teaser here. We have the Elder Wild, which is the Fey realm, purely Fey. It's a completely separate reality from the one we are used to. We also have our world, and at certain times of the year, Fey can cross between the two and potentially drag others with them.
Oh.
Or, under the right circumstances, things from the Fey realm can be dragged into ours.
Dun, dun, dun.
However, that takes a butt ton of power. So, here's the interesting thing. I actually have an entire family tree, effectively, of how all the races are related via bloodlines to either Fey or human origins.
Very nice.
Wow, that's cool.
Basically, the premise being every single species we have is either human, Fey, or some combination thereof.
Nice.
So these creatures have been basically living alongside humanity for the entire time, hiding among them.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Which makes it very interesting when we're talking about places like the Devil's Own, because it's a supernatural friendly bar owned by the alpha werewolf of the city, and unless you're supernatural, you can't even get to it.
Nice.
But it's right in the heart of the city. It's right in the heart of the university district.
Now, if you're part supernatural, would you be able to get into it?
Well, obviously.
Okay.
You've got that Fey blood, as it were.
That edge. Okay, that makes sense.
That edge. Unless you're purely 100%, your entire family is mortal to the point where you have such a negligible amount of Fey blood in you that there's enough to fill your little toe, then you probably wouldn't get through. But it's got the potential for certain characters then to develop abilities that they might not have known they had.
That's really interesting. I like that.
I would like to talk about the concept of utilizing the whole idea of hiding magical and, you know, fae and paranormal things existences, and the converse of they, you know, kind of developed alongside in public, you know, like they're known kind of thing, and how that changes how you address points in history, how it changes, you know, maybe the course of history itself in certain ways, or maybe explains things, you know, and how those kinds of things can be used to deal with that.
Well, I guess I can start with mine. So the parahuman characters, the fake characters, yes, they've had to grow up alongside pure humans for, well, as far back as like even before like Arthurian legend. Like we go back many, many years BC. But that's for another series that I'm actually writing with my co-author A.E. Keller. Purple Door District is a offshoot of that. Anyway, so the characters basically in society, humans are starting to know about the parahumans, but there's still such an amount of fear and prejudice against them. That's why the Purple Door Districts have been created. So they know that they can be in these areas where it's safe, they can be themselves, and they know who they can go to for help. You have the traditional sense of the coven vampires sticking together, protecting themselves, the werewolves in their human forms protecting themselves, the avians protecting themselves, etc., etc. So they find ways to survive and adjust. Now, that's not to say they don't end up tangling with humans, either falling in love with humans and then having hybrid children, essentially. Or there's another faction of humans who know about the parahumans and do not like them, and they become the hunters. They hunt them down, take them out. They see them as abominations, and they want to eradicate them. But even the hunters end up splitting off. You have the hunters who just want to destroy all parahumans, and then you also have the hunters who just want to take care of any threats. So they're perfectly fine if there's a pack living in Chicago, if they're not causing any trouble. But if you got a rogue werewolf running through, turning people, that's a big issue. I think one of the biggest problems my characters tend to have is heightened emotions and allowing their parahuman side to slip out. So Wolf Eye is turning more golden. The werebirds actually have the biggest trouble with that, because with all of the animal related parahumans, they don't have like another side that they're connected with. They're human and they turn into werewolf. That's it. The avians actually have an inner bird in their mind that they bond with. They are two entities that create one. And if the bird gets ticked off and the human's a bit more calm, the bird can start coming out. So you get the talons growing on the fingers, the eyes changing, feather patterns appearing on the flesh. So avians have to be very careful about controlling their emotions so stuff like that doesn't happen and completely give them away.
Interesting, because I'm looking back at my racial genealogy, and I actually have timelines in for everything as well. Here's an interesting one for you. Because they've developed alongside the humanity, 4,000 years ago was the first sighting of shifters. Now consider what was going on in Egypt around about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago.
Wait, you mean the cat-headed goddess isn't just a goddess or a metaphor?
The potential is there for the shifters to have been among the gods of, or at least the supposed gods of Egypt.
Same, have had that. It's so cool, right? It's so much fun.
But what makes that an interesting fact at all is the fact that our shifters do not have a human hybrid form.
Oh.
So they are basically true shifters.
Nice.
So when you talk about the werewolf in London scenario, it's never going to happen. What you're going to get, you'll see a wolf in the city, maybe. If someone goes crazy enough to change in the middle of the city and go running around like a mad thing. But you're never going to get the monster forms that you see so commonly in film and TV.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally a case of human down to animal, nothing in between. Once the change has started, it cannot be stopped.
So you better not start changing right in the middle of the city, otherwise you're in trouble.
Well, you've also got the other consideration of, well, the change is completely changing your morphology.
That's true.
Would you want to be changing in the middle of a crowded city, where if your change is for certain types, there's a potential you'll end up strangling yourself with your own clothes.
Let's not.
So your choice is, don't shift and potentially die, or take your clothes off to shift and get arrested for public indecency.
See, that is always one of the issues that I think people run into, is how do your characters change form? Do they do it with clothing, without clothing? Do they have like this magical essence that causes the clothing to disappear? Like, you know. So I like how you do it, the shifters. I was gonna say, just kind of a fun little fact. There is, just to go with history and how you asked if it adjusts things. I do have in there that the whole Midsummer Night's Dream that William Shakespeare wrote, yeah, that was actually about a king and queen fairy that he met from the veil. So, and the king and William Shakespeare are actually really, really good friends.
Yeah, I think I've seen something along those lines before. It's an interesting way of looking at it, because once you start having the supernatural creatures interacting with key figures, it becomes very interesting. You have the potential for even the smallest thing to change the course of history entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But since we're writing urban fantasy and we're not writing alternate realities, we have to work, unlike people writing alternate futures or alternate modern times, we have to work backwards to try and explain events that happened in the past with supernatural means.
Right.
Whereas instead of having the means changing the history,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the what if Hitler won the war scenario. Instead, we get to play with the, okay, so just how many werewolves were sent over during the D-Day landings?
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of basis for that. I mean, if you look at, like, even Indiana Jones, which people do not consider paranormal at all, but dude, have you seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? That
Right.
ending, come on.
That was purely paranormal.
Right? So, the whole idea that Hitler was, it was very well documented that he was into occult type of things. It's fun to play with things like, Indiana Jones, Hellboy both do this really hardcore, where, not only did the Nazis play with the occult, but there was some serious stuff going on that was just barely stopped in the nick of time, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the big question you're talking when you look at that. If you're looking at that scenario, what deals did Hitler make for Germany to expand the way it did, and when did the price come due?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure I can all figure out the conflagration in the ditch was kind of a big hint as to when that tab came due. But, I mean, the thing is, it really depends, because there's not enough information to know what he got a hold of or what he thought it would do, or, whether it was him or some of his, officers or whatever. So there's a lot of room to play with that. I actually did a spin-off short story for the Rune Spells where a neo-Nazi gets a hold of an artifact that was owned by Hitler, and it's essentially one of the arm, like the hand wrap things that David wore when he killed Goliath. So when you have like this rotting scrap of metal around your hand and you kind of go like this, it literally shoots a bullet or a stone like a gun.
Oh my gosh.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. So
another thing we also get to play with is looking back through mythology.
Yes.
When you go back through mythology, you've got so many tie-ins to potential supernatural events.
mm-hmm.
But you've also got, sorry, you also get the tie-in with named items, or weapons that were known to have been owned by certain people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's something my wife liked to look into when she was writing the stories about Rose by Any Other Name. It was the swords in her case. She's just sitting back here smiling at me. Because I don't want to give away the details of who the sword was originally owned by, but it will make an appearance.
Yeah.
Question, is the sword named Excalibur?
Okay, I can put minds at rest. It is not Excalibur.
Okay.
It's older.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is there is a lot of human history that is either just so poorly recorded, or the records have been lost, or our understanding of the time just was not enough for us to be able to explain what was going on adequately.
Or it was translated wrong, too.
Or it was translated wrong. I mean, there's...
Or the writer's got it muddled.
Right.
Another one of my wife's wonderful phrases.
There's just a lot of vagaries in human history. Really, until the Renaissance, it is entirely possible for the paranormal to have not been underground.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Because, it wasn't really until the Renaissance that we were like, no, you have to prove that you can do fireballs.
Was Vlad the Impaler really a vampire?
I mean, all the
Or
history...
was he something nastier?
All the history of if, non-humans existed, that could have been wiped out. Especially if there was maybe, I don't know, a religious fanatic thing that happened where they were like, no, this goes against everything we believe. We must burn all this stuff so that it doesn't carry through.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh,
very true.
I'm so glad that got dropped.
Then you also go back, you also have all the witch trials, and yes, historically it's known that most of the people in question actually had influence over others, or were not popular for various reasons, so it became an excuse. But there again, it's the supernatural community we're looking at here. What was the truth?
Yeah. Well, and there's interesting concepts that I've seen that the entire idea of changelings. I've seen some people posit that the concept of the changeling came about because of people not understanding children with autism.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the really fun thing is, you can take that and turn it on its head and say, well, okay, so what if autism is a condition that comes as a possible side effect of mingling the bloodlines with Fae?
That's interesting.
It's interesting you mentioned changelings, so I'm looking at my genealogy, and I have changelings listed.
I love it.
So yes, it has been considered.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting concept looking at that. when you look, it's how does the supernatural affect people's ability to deal with things?
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look through the old Lovecraft stories, I mean, something that's filled with so much occult material, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And literally pretty much anything out there that gets summoned by these people, or anything you read in connection with them, could potentially send you completely and utterly insane.
Mm-hmm.
And if you play the game, one of the things that shows up in is things like weird quirks.
Well, and
But it's nothing that wasn't based on what actually happened in the stories.
yeah. And the interesting thing is, we know so much about the world and about people and how we function and our biology, and even, you know, a significant amount about our psychology. But really, a lot of that only shows how little we actually know. And there's so much that it's just like, well, you know, this causes this and this causes this, but we're not really sure how that jumps to that other thing over there. We just know that there's some sort of causation.
Now, here's the interesting question that based on that is, we know so much about human physiology.
Mm-hmm.
What about in a world where we've got the supernatural sitting alongside it?
Mm-hmm.
Are there significant differences? It's a question I had to look at. And it's one of the reasons why I didn't go for a hybrid form.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally, if you're in a supernatural community and you're a shapeshifter, how do you get healthcare?
That's true.
Right.
If you go through a hospital, first thing they're going to do is take your vitals.
Yeah.
If you've got a broken limb as a shifter, the first thing they're going to try and do is take an X-ray.
Yeah. And you know, the interesting
These are
thing.
things you have to consider.
Oh yeah.
No, you're right. You're right.
There's so much you can play with in that too. Like, you know, the whole idea that human physiology does not can mismatch with paranormal physiology is fascinating, because we do have so many diseases that we have no real clue what the causes are.
Right.
I mean, you know, we understand that carcinogens cause cancer, but really not everyone who smokes gets cancer. So there's this element of, you know, luck of the draw, roll of the dice, maybe a couple of spells, or
Yeah, I was going to say, who did you upset?
well, yeah. But you know, maybe people who have the genetics of trolls have a greater tendency to get cancer, or, you know, melanomas, or, you know, stuff like that. What if a lot of diseases have to do with this, like, really in-depth, like, pandemic of interbreeding? You know, we don't notice it because so many people have fey blood in them, or whatever. So it's not really skewing our numbers, but what we get our genes from, and yes, that's what we get our genes from, can have a significant effect as to what kind of diseases we're prone to.
So here's an interesting question. The big avian flu epidemic, was it caused by bird shifters?
That's my territory. Actually, I'll just say that there was, can't say too much, I'll just say yes, there was historically some things involved with the birds. I'm just going to say that.
I wasn't hoping to get any secrets given away on that one.
Well, when you're talking about historical stuff, you know, you do have to go back and look through history and see where your parahumans or your supernaturals can apply. And believe me, we found a lot of places where our parahumans could show up.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to, like, you know, going to what other attributes being supernatural affords them, like a lot of my parahumans, they have faster healing abilities. So one of the problems that my characters run into is they get taken to a hospital and they're completely beat up, and then an hour later suddenly a broken bone is back in place. They're like, what the hell's going on? So they actually have to get taken to a district hospital that has parahuman doctors who can specifically treat them. You know,
Which would be interesting if it should be very interesting if you're in a hit and run.
right? Exactly, because it's just like, oh crap, what in the world's going on?
You get your medic alert bracelet.
Yes, I can only be treated here. But one thing that Sarah said about maybe being part fae or being a troll or something makes us more susceptible to getting certain diseases. I mean, I have an allergy to nickel. Pure silver is the best thing for me. So obviously I'm not a werewolf, but I could be fae. Maybe certain metals I don't do well with.
So here's the other question. I mean, we've got a lot of supernatural lore through the years. You know, vampires, steaks and garlic, werewolves, silver bullets. My big question here is, how much of that do you just throw straight out the window?
I make jokes about it. Actually. One of my characters, Gavin, cracked me up because a newbie vampire was asking him about that kind of stuff. And he's like, yeah, we just make those up for people so that they try to do, you know,
Stupid things.
to throw garlic at us and nothing's going to happen. I'm still going to eat them. But he said, you know, sometimes they say that saying the Holy One's name is going to cause you to burst into flames. So he starts singing Away in the Manger, and when he gets to singing Jesus, he's just like, and his friend is like, seriously? And he goes, see, I didn't burst into flames. I'm good. He's like, be a pretty piss poor Lord if your sheep turned into flames when they said your name. So most of those I throw out.
Yeah, from my point of view, things like the supernaturals who are likely to eat you, you start throwing wolfsbane or garlic at them, they're probably just going to look at you and go, ooh, seasoning.
Yes. Now, I will say that wolfsbane does affect my werewolves, but there's typically some kind of herb that ends up affecting some of my characters. It's something with their genetics. It happens. So wolfsbane, yes, does screw up with the werewolves, but things like garlic isn't going to affect my vampires, and the sun isn't necessarily going to cause them to burst into flames. So and the biggest change with my vampires is they're actually technically not undead. The vampiric part of them is a type of condition that they are born with that does make them more susceptible to the sun, makes them anemic, so that's why they have the fangs in which to draw in other blood to keep them strong and powerful. And they can choose whether they want to shoot venom into somebody else or not. They're like snakes. They got their venom sacs.
So here's the question. From my point of view, because Sandy and I, when we started writing the Shadows over the Seattle material, we decided we didn't want blood as the only source of sustenance for vampires.
Mm-hmm.
What else would a vampire live off?
Coconut water.
Coconut water.
No, seriously.
Yes,
But there are actually companies that are working on making blood substitutes out of coconut milk.
Really?
Because it is literally that close to human blood in its structure.
That's interesting.
Okay, that one I'm going to be giving to my wife later.
I like that. I'm going to have to
every now and again on Facebook, you'll see this thing going around about vegan vampires who move to the tropics and drink coconut milk. And I always think it's completely hilarious because it could probably work.
It probably could. I mean, my vampires, like I said, they're not undead. They can still eat and get sustenance from that. I mean, they might do better if they have a raw steak, perhaps, because that's blood as well getting into their system. They can still function more like a normal human being, but they do have that craving for human blood, and they also have synthetic blood that they can do as well. Because not every vampire wants to go around sucking on somebody's neck and leaving, bodies on the ground.
See, that's the consideration here.
Yeah.
if you've got even a halfway decent sized population of vampires anywhere, 2 bite marks in the neck is going to be an obvious giveaway that you've got them. But if a vampire is capable of living off, say, sexual energy or elemental energy, or even just someone's life force, I think we ended up with about 5 or 6 different types of vampire. 5.
Well, if you're doing
with
sexual
different
energy, you're getting more into
sources of energy.
Yeah, if you're doing sexual, you're kind of getting a bit more into the succubus, incubi type stuff too. With that,
But realistically, isn't that what they are? They're classified as a demonic life form, but they are leading a vampiric lifestyle.
This is true. That's true. I will say, like, the bite marks are definitely a dead giveaway, which is why the vampires that I have, they have a slight healing saliva, so they can lick the wound and it heals faster. So kind of like how they have their own inner healing properties, they can apply that to their victim to hide the marks on it. But not every vampire really cares about that, and they'll still leave their body count behind. Those are your rogue vampires that you don't really want to mess with.
Yeah, we actually have, I think we used blood purely as except for one group, as a purely healing method.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, you can live off something. Yes, you can survive on other means, but you still require blood to heal.
Interesting. Now, okay, so we've talked a lot about the specifics of certain mythos and how we like to apply them and such. So when you hear about an interesting myth, I guess, okay, so the better question is, do you allow the myths and legends that already exist to inform your stories, or do you change the myths and legends to fit your stories? And in what, like, because obviously it's not going to be 100% either way, to what degree do you tend towards one or the other?
To both of those, I'll just say yes. It depends on the situation. Some mythos or some of the stories help influence characters, and then we take our supernaturals and weave them in of, okay, how could they have fit into this story? In some cases, we just let them be as they are. And, you know, there really was a human King Arthur. There really was a sorcerer named Merlin. There really was this. And we let that kind of mold how things go through the story. So it really depends on the situation. Like Timothy was saying, like during, you know, Egyptian time, shifters suddenly made an appearance. Well, that in his now I can't speak. Our parahumans did that as well. There was an appearance of them. We modified the story without anybody really knowing. We let the story be, but with a slight change to it. So it depends on the situation. You can I do both.
Yeah, I think you have to be a mix on those two. We actually have particular myths that we address from the point of view of their older stories. Some of them from Native Americans, some of them from eyewitness reports. And we've taken aspects of both. One of the monsters we're dealing with later in the series, which we haven't actually started writing yet, we know exactly who it is, what it is, and where it came from. But we've also gone back and looked at, well, okay, so this is the creature. It's existed for this long. As far as we're concerned, it still exists and could be coming back at any point. What are the signs that this creature is still out there? And who would be affected by it historically?
Is it a Kraken?
It's not a Kraken.
Oh man, I love the Kraken.
Oh no,
Unleash the Kraken.
No, I don't think we're going to be doing that at any time soon. That's more Anita's thing.
one of the things that you said caught my attention. I've been teaching an after-school class for writing for middle schoolers, and I've been having this kind of ongoing discussion about the giant shark, the movie that just came out recently.
Megalodon? The Megalodon?
Yes. And they're like, well, what if it really existed? And I'm like, dude, okay, first of all, if that thing existed, we would know. And they're like, how would you know? You wouldn't know. And I'm like, because we are tracking fish populations. And we would notice a giant swath of fish just randomly disappearing. I'm just saying.
I'm shaking my head on that one.
Why?
Go back through the reports of fish from fishermen over the years. When was the first sighting of giant squid?
Mm-hmm.
When was the first one brought up on board a ship? We've had the myths of Kraken and everything for how long? And it's only within the last few years that they've actually managed to bring a giant squid on board.
Yeah.
The coelacanth, supposedly extinct, but caught by fishermen.
Uh-huh. Now, the big difference between those is the sheer size. I mean, we can tell when there's something huge out there, but when you're talking about something that big, I mean, that's getting a little harder to, especially if you're talking about an entire population that is sustainable, not just one, but like a whole population of them. We would have to know, we would notice their migration patterns based on deaths.
You would notice them if they are sufficiently close to the surface that we are tracking. That
truth.
What if the megalodon's a shifter? Then it can hide under the radar.
What the heck does it shift into?
Hang on. It's a sea creature. By definition, if it's already under the radar.
Yes,
You'd have to be talking about under the sonar at this point.
Yes, sonar.
So anyways, but the thing is, that's a really good point, that there are ways that we have to think about things in order to explain them. If you're going to bring in a ginormous shark species, you have to figure out what they're going to eat and how we haven't noticed the decreases in fish populations and why that happens, and things like that. You have to be able to explain that to a sufficient degree to make it realistic.
This is true.
So okay, now I'm trying to. Okay, you both answered that question, didn't you? I'm going to answer the question. I actually utilize a written text that dates back pretty darn close to 1,200 years ago. So it's technically mythology. It's the Havamal. Norse Mythology, one of the earliest written works from that area. And one of the things that I really enjoy about that is, even though there is a certain amount of poetic license that I take with that, and primarily because it was interpreted by monks, and they kind of had an agenda when you're talking about other religions. So taking all of that into account, making sure there's a certain amount of poetic license, I really enjoy having the idea that those texts might be more than just stories. They might be something a little more solid, and therefore can be relied upon and utilized as not really necessarily a historical document, but a guideline to actual occurrences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and on the same vein, you've got all the Greek and Roman mythologies as well, especially like the big voyages that happened. The Norse are just as bad for that one.
Yeah.
Everybody's going on a ship.
you then have to start questioning whether or not, okay, so where's a sea-based civilization? I mean, are we going to realistically run into a siren while we're out there? And if so, are we going to end up tying ourselves to the mast and hope someone can stay sane?
You know, there's another aspect to that too, like the reasoning that we give in our modern science thinking for, you know, what people were seeing back then. You know, the whole idea that manatees were what people were seeing when they saw mermaids. Now, I mean, that seems a little
in some waters, I'd say potentially.
Yeah, it just seems like a bit of a stretch. Like, you know, mermaids were like beautiful and thin, and you know, their fishy tails were sparkly, and they sat on rocks and brushed their hair. Manatees look like they've been sitting on the couch watching soap operas or something.
Absolutely.
Wrong class of mermaid there.
But a manatee wouldn't explain something like sirens, because the mythology comes from an area that wouldn't have had them.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
So, you know,
when you look at the mythology, you've also got to consider the area it came from and the potential excuses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can sometimes literally just fall apart.
Yeah.
But the modern world goes, oh, we've got this myth. There's the answer.
Yeah. Well, it's also really fun to play with the idea that we're partially right. Like, maybe manatees are a kind of
manatees wear mermaids.
Or selkies. They could be selkies.
Selkies, yeah.
Yeah, how many forms does a selkie have? I seem to remember there's quite a few.
Yeah, they could take on a lot of different ones. So I gotta say, I don't think I'd be wanting to walk around with manatee blubber on my back.
Could go either way on that. So let's do a real quick outro and tell people where they can find us. Erin, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Again, I'm Erin Casey, author of The Purple Door District, and that is my bird. You can find my booth under the Urban Fantasy section. Otherwise, you can find me at erincasey.org, and that has all my blog, my books, and my author spotlights.
Awesome. And Timothy?
I'm Timothy Bateson, urban fantasy and sci-fi writer, co-author of the Shadows Over Seattle series. I'm available at timothybatesonauthor.com. I'm also on the booths at Urban Fantasy and Science Fiction at the event. I'm also the guy running everything, so you can find us there at OWSCycon.ourrightside.com. That's OWSCycon.ourrightside.com.
All right, and I'm Sarah Berman, author of the Runespells series, your host for this evening, and the genre manager for Urban Fantasy. And I think that it is safe to say that we should be taking notes as to books to read, because a lot of these ideas sound way too fun. And you can find me at authorgoddess.com. So thank you guys very much for joining me tonight. This has been super fun and amusing. And we will see you guys later.
See you around OWSCycon.